The delicate lace of the Chantilly veil, an heirloom of intricate beauty, seemed to shimmer in the soft golden light filtering through the grand ballroom. Ethan Thorne's hand, a stark, masculine contrast against the ethereal fabric, hovered for a breath, then moved with a deliberate slowness and almost cinematic grace towards Olivia's face. The air in the St. Regis Hotel, thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and the hushed anticipation of 200 elite guests, seemed to hold its breath with him. He could almost feel the cool, gossamer threads of the lace against his fingertips, the subtle weight of it as it began its ascent. In that fleeting, infinitesimal moment, the world narrowed to the fragile barrier between them, a final partition between his certainty and whatever lay beneath. He was prepared for a facade, for the carefully constructed expression of a woman he believed to be a master manipulator. He had braced himself for the transactional gaze he was convinced she harbored, a reflection of the cold, hard bargain they were about to strike. He was ready for anything but the shattering impossibility that was about to unfold. His focus, usually razor-sharp, was now fixated on the subtle curve of her jaw, the faint outline of her lips, the enigmatic shadow of her eyes just visible through the intricate pattern. He was 36 years old, a formidable tech CEO from a storied New York City family, a man whose life was built on data, logic, and billions of dollars. And yet, in this precise, suspended instant, he felt an unprecedented tremor of something primal and unsettling that had nothing to do with market analytics or corporate strategy. This was the precipice of a decision that would forever alter the carefully constructed trajectory of his life, a life that, until now, had been defined by a relentless pursuit of control and a profound, unyielding grief. Just days before, the sheer absurdity of his situation still chafed him, a constant, irritating hum beneath the surface of his otherwise unassailable composure. Ethan Thorne, architect of digital empires and scion of an old-money dynasty, was being strong-armed into an arranged marriage. The irony was not lost on him. He, who meticulously planned every variable, who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, was now a pawn in a larger game. A recent vicious corporate scandal had left an indelible stain on Thorne Industries' public image, threatening a crucial new investment deal that could either solidify their future or send it tumbling into an abyss of speculation and ruin. His board, a collection of venerable but risk-averse grey suits, had brokered this union as a strategic maneuver, a public display of stability and traditional values to soothe nervous investors. And the chosen solution? Olivia Hayes. 30 years old, a seemingly modest single mother from Flushing, Queens, with a 5-year-old daughter named Lily. Ethan had heard the descriptions, read the sanitized dossiers, and each detail had only fueled his simmering disdain. He envisioned a calculating opportunist, a gold digger who had, through some insidious means, manipulated his board and exploited his family's precarious public standing. She was a transactional solution, nothing more, a means to an end. His prenuptial agreement, a fortress of legal clauses painstakingly drafted by his family's sharpest attorneys, was designed to protect every last penny of his vast wealth. Every asset, every future earning, every generational trust was shielded by impenetrable language. Yet despite these ironclad protections, he harbored a deep visceral sense of perceived betrayal. He was absolutely certain that Olivia was hiding a vast secret, a carefully constructed facade he was grimly determined to crack, brick by excruciating brick. His first move, swift and clinical, was to deploy his most trusted asset, Marcus Miller, a retired NYPD detective, now a discreet private investigator whose reputation for unearthing buried truths was legendary. Ethan had handed Marcus Olivia's name, a hefty retainer, and an unambiguous directive. Find everything, every whisper, every misstep, every inconvenient truth. Leave no stone unturned. He wanted proof of her machinations, evidence that would validate his cynicism and arm him for the emotional distance he planned to maintain throughout this unwelcome charade. Marcus's reports began to trickle in, precise and utterly devoid of the scandalous revelations Ethan craved. The details were, to his profound irritation, surprisingly bland. Olivia Hayes possessed a clean record, a life of quiet normalcy in a modest apartment on Union Street, in the heart of Queens. Her freelance graphic design business, while legitimate, was clearly struggling, a fact Ethan noted with a cynical raise of an eyebrow. Lily, her daughter, was enrolled in a local public school, reportedly bright and remarkably well-adjusted for a child being raised by a single parent. There was no opulent past, no hidden inheritance, no shadowy connections that screamed gold digger, just a woman seemingly ordinary, navigating the everyday struggles of urban life. But then, Marcus's latest report had flagged an unusual, almost imperceptible gap, a period of roughly 2 years where Olivia's digital footprint and public records were eerily sparse. It was a detail Ethan mentally catalogued, a slight anomaly in an otherwise unblemished profile, yet he couldn't connect it to anything meaningful. It felt like a loose thread in an otherwise tightly woven tapestry, intriguing but ultimately irrelevant. The gap, coincidentally, aligned with the final years of his late fiancée, Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, the woman he had loved profoundly, had tragically died in a car accident 5 years ago in upstate New York, a loss that had hollowed him out and built the cynical walls around his heart. He dismissed the thought immediately, almost violently. Sarah's past was thoroughly documented, her life a transparent book, her death officially concluded after a painstaking investigation. The idea of any connection was preposterous, a macabre trick of the mind. He forced himself to focus on the immediate, tangible problem, the woman he was about to marry. In the evenings leading up to the wedding, Ethan found himself engaged in a covert ritual. He would drive his black, armored Mercedes-Benz to the quiet streets of Flushing, parking several blocks away from Olivia's apartment, a dark, imposing silhouette against the soft glow of streetlights. From the shadowed confines of his car, he would watch. He observed her in the neighborhood park, a small, unassuming patch of green amidst the brick and concrete, as she interacted with Lily. He watched as Olivia patiently helped Lily navigate the monkey bars, her laughter a light, genuine sound that grated against his carefully cultivated resentment. He saw her tie Lily's shoelaces with a gentle touch, her voice a soft murmur as she read from a worn picture book on a park bench. He registered a tenderness, a patience, and an undeniable maternal affection that both disarmed and deeply irritated him. He had expected overt ambition, an obvious performance of humility, but what he witnessed was authentic, unforced. This stark contrast between his deeply ingrained expectations of a calculated opportunist and her unassuming, genuine behavior only deepened his suspicion. She must be an exceptionally skilled actress, he concluded, or her manipulation ran far deeper, more subtly than he could possibly imagine. It was a more dangerous, more intricate game than he had initially conceived. As the opulent wedding day loomed closer, small, almost imperceptible details began to accumulate, each one chipping away at Ethan's carefully constructed certainty, unsettling him in ways he couldn't articulate. At a wedding tasting hosted at the St. Regis Hotel on East 55th Street, the very venue where he would soon commit to this transactional farce, Olivia had casually corrected his pronunciation of a rare French wine varietal. Her fluency, effortless and natural, had surprised him. He prided himself on his encyclopedic knowledge of fine wines, a necessary accoutrement of his social stratum. Her correction, delivered without pretension, felt like a breach, an unexpected demonstration of an obscure sophistication he hadn't anticipated. Later, during an awkward family luncheon, she had picked up a dropped, vintage silver locket belonging to his aunt, remarking on its antique craftsmanship with a surprising knowledge that far surpassed casual interest. She identified the specific era of its engraving, the likely origin of its filigree, details that Ethan, despite his family's long history with such artifacts, would have struggled to recall. His grandmother, Evelyn Thorne, a formidable matriarch whose sharp intuition was legendary within their family, had taken an unusually keen liking to Olivia. Evelyn, who rarely extended warmth to anyone outside her immediate, carefully vetted circle, often remarked on a familiar resilience in Olivia's eyes, a quiet strength that resonated deeply with the old woman. "She reminds me of someone," Evelyn had mused one afternoon, her gaze distant, almost wistful. Ethan, preoccupied with his own swirling suspicions and the mounting pressures of his corporate world, had impatiently brushed off the comment, attributing it to his grandmother's advancing age and sentimental nature. Yet the words lingered, an almost imperceptible discordant note in the symphony of his carefully orchestrated doubts. Then, just days before the ceremony, the final, most damning piece of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. Ethan was leaving his townhouse, hurrying to a late-night board meeting, when he overheard Olivia on a hushed phone call. Her voice, usually calm and composed, was strained, laced with a palpable tension. She was discussing a final payment and a debt repaid to a mysterious third party. The words, indistinct yet undeniably charged with secrecy, echoed in the quiet street. This clandestine conversation, captured by chance in the cool New York air, seemed to confirm his very worst fears. She was undeniably in this for the money, perhaps settling a hidden obligation, validating his cynical belief that she was a skilled opportunist who had masterfully played her hand. The confirmation solidified his resolve. He steeled himself for the ceremony, the gilded cage awaiting him, resolute in his conviction that he was entering a purely transactional marriage. His heart, already scarred by profound loss, would remain completely out of it. He would endure this charade, secure his company's future, and then and only then would he begin the slow, arduous process of extricating himself from this gilded trap. The veil, a symbol of purity and new beginnings, would, for him, represent only the final, blinding confirmation of a betrayal he had anticipated all along. The air in Ethan Thorne's penthouse apartment, usually a sanctuary of controlled order, felt stifling. The overheard phone call, Olivia's strained voice murmuring about final payment and debt repaid, had solidified his conviction. It was exactly as he suspected, a calculated transaction, a cold, hard bargain. He had spent his entire adult life building an empire on the bedrock of logic and reason, and now that foundation was being tested by the sheer audacity of this woman. The wedding was 3 days away, a countdown to what he fully expected to be a lavish public performance of a life he would not truly inhabit. He stood before the panoramic window, the glittering tapestry of Manhattan stretching out beneath him, a city of 1,000,000 stories, none as cynically orchestrated as his own. The city lights, usually a source of inspiration, now felt like 1,000 prying eyes, anticipating his inevitable public sacrifice. His phone buzzed. It was Marcus Miller. Ethan answered, his voice devoid of emotion. "Any progress, Marcus?" he asked, already anticipating more mundane reports that would fail to expose the grand manipulation he felt certain was at play. "Nothing substantial, Mr. Thorne," Marcus's gruff voice replied. "Still clean. Did find something minor, though. That 2-year gap I mentioned in her records, the one after her parents passed. Turns out she was living in a small town upstate for part of that time, up near the Catskills. Not far from where, you know." Marcus paused, a beat of uncomfortable silence. Ethan knew. It was where Sarah had died. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut, but immediately dismissed it as a morbid coincidence. "Any specific address? A job? Anything concrete?" Ethan pressed, his jaw tight. "No, sir. Just a small rented cabin. Paid in cash. No official paper trail. She seems to have gone entirely off-grid for about 18 months of that period. Even for someone grieving, it's unusual. But no nefarious activity. No criminal record, no strange associates. Just a blank space, then she reappeared in Queens." Marcus's voice held a note of genuine bewilderment. "A blank space," Ethan repeated, the phrase echoing in the polished emptiness of his apartment. "A convenient blank space. Keep digging, Marcus. There's something there. There has to be." He ended the call, the words leaving a bitter taste. The upstate detail was unsettling, too close for comfort, but he refused to entertain the ghost of a possibility. Sarah was gone. This woman was Olivia Hayes, and she was playing him for a fool. The pre-wedding festivities were a gauntlet of social obligations, each one a fresh arena for his suspicions. The Thorne family, old money and steeped in tradition, demanded a certain display, even for an arranged marriage. There was the engagement party, a stifling affair at Evelyn Thorne's Fifth Avenue townhouse, where Gilded Age paintings lined the walls and whispered histories hung in the air. Ethan watched Olivia from across the room, a glass of champagne clutched in his hand, a thin smile plastered on his face. She navigated the shark-infested waters of New York's elite with an unnerving grace. She engaged his 90-year-old great-aunt Mildred in a lively discussion about Impressionist art. Casually referencing obscure artists Ethan himself barely knew, she charmed his board members, discussing economic forecasts with an intelligent, insightful perspective that hinted at more than just a passing interest in corporate finance. He watched as she laughed, a sound that was light and clear, not forced, and engaged with Lily, who clung to her side in a way that made even the most cynical socialites murmur approvingly. Lily, a bright-eyed 5-year-old, was always near, a constant, tangible reminder of Olivia's status as a single mother. Her presence was both a shield for Olivia and a constant irritant for Ethan, a living embodiment of the inconvenient truth of his impending family. During one particularly excruciating conversation with a distant cousin, Ethan saw Olivia lean down and whisper something into Lily's ear. Lily giggled, then held up a small, smooth riverstone, tracing its surface with her tiny finger. Olivia smiled, a private, knowing look passing between them. Ethan felt a familiar, unwelcome pang in his chest. Sarah, he remembered, had collected riverstones, finding solace in their simple, enduring beauty. She'd kept a small, polished collection on her bedside table, each one a memory of a shared hike or a quiet moment by a stream. He clenched his jaw, dismissing the thought as another trick of his grieving mind, a desperate attempt to find Sarah where she couldn't possibly be. Later that evening, Evelyn Thorne, his grandmother, cornered him by the antique fireplace, her eyes, shrewd and observant, fixed on him. "Ethan," she began, her voice a low, gravelly whisper that commanded attention, "you are a fool if you cannot see what is right in front of you." Ethan managed a tight, polite smile. "I assure you, grandmother, I see everything." Evelyn snorted, a surprisingly undignified sound. "Do you? Olivia, she has a way about her. A certain resilience, yes, but also a quiet strength that reminds me so much of your mother in her younger days, and of Sarah. There's a kindness there, a depth you rarely find in these circles. You would do well to open your eyes, my dear boy." She patted his arm, a surprisingly gentle gesture, and then swept away, leaving Ethan feeling unnerved. His grandmother, usually so discerning, was clearly being taken in by Olivia's performance. Or was she? The doubt, a tiny seed, began to sprout in his mind, unwelcome and unsettling. A few days later, a mandatory meeting with the wedding planner and florists at the St. Regis became another platform for Olivia's unexpected talents. As the florist, a notoriously flamboyant and opinionated man, presented a collection of exotic floral arrangements, Olivia, with a polite but firm tone, pointed out that one particular bloom, a rare orchid, was not only out of season but also notoriously difficult to maintain in New York's humid climate. She suggested an alternative, a less common variety of camellia, explaining its superior resilience and more subtle fragrance with an ease that suggested professional knowledge. The florist, initially miffed, quickly conceded, impressed by her botanical acumen. Ethan watched, dumbfounded. He knew Olivia's freelance graphic design business was struggling. Where did she acquire such obscure knowledge? It couldn't be mere coincidence. It had to be part of her elaborate charade, another layer to her cunning. He remembered Sarah's passion for gardening, her dream of someday having a sprawling English garden filled with rare and beautiful blooms. She had spent hours poring over botanical encyclopedias, memorizing species and climates. He shook his head, pushing the memory away with a force that almost made him dizzy. No, it was just a coincidence. A cruel, unnecessary coincidence. The final pre-wedding dinner was a small, intimate affair with immediate family, held at a private dining room in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. During dessert, Lily, who had been remarkably well-behaved throughout the evening, suddenly started to hum a tune. It was an old lullaby, a forgotten melody from Ethan's own childhood. He froze, his spoon clattering against the china plate. He hadn't heard that tune in decades. His mother used to sing it to him. And Sarah, he remembered with a jolt, had hummed it absent-mindedly when she was stressed, or sometimes when she was deeply focused on her artwork. He looked at Olivia, who was watching Lily with a soft smile, her eyes filled with an unmistakable warmth. Olivia caught his gaze, her smile faltering slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes before she quickly averted them. The blood drained from Ethan's face. How could Lily know that song? How could Olivia know it? He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a cold premonition that pierced through his cynical resolve. He excused himself from the table, claiming an urgent business call, and retreated to the hushed elegance of the men's lounge. He immediately called Marcus Miller, his voice low and urgent. "Marcus, that 2-year gap. You said she rented a cabin upstate. Was there anything else? Any local interactions, any names?" Marcus sounded surprised by the urgency. "I'll recheck, sir, but it was a cash rental, minimal contact with anyone. I remember one local, a retired midwife, said Olivia sometimes helped out with gardening at a small community centre, said she had a real green thumb. Gardening. The word hit Ethan like a physical blow. Sarah's green thumb, her passion, the camellias, the locket, the French wine, the lullaby. An avalanche of seemingly disparate details suddenly converged, swirling in his mind like a nascent storm. He remembered his grandmother's words. She reminds me of someone. The pieces, individually insignificant, were beginning to form a terrifyingly coherent picture. A picture that threatened to shatter his carefully constructed reality. He leaned his forehead against the cool, polished marble of the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was wrong. He had been so utterly, completely wrong. The gold digger persona, the calculated opportunist, it was all a smokescreen. But if it wasn't greed, if it wasn't manipulation for financial gain, then what was it? What unspeakable secret could possibly bind Olivia Hayes, a single mother from Queens, to the meticulously planned public death of Sarah Jenkins, his beloved fiancée? The thought was a serpent coiling in his stomach, cold and venomous. He ran a hand through his hair, the silk of his suit feeling suffocating. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Not just proof of a lie, but the devastating truth. He decided he wouldn't confront Olivia before the wedding. He couldn't. The stakes were too high, the timing too delicate with the corporate deal hanging in the balance. But he would watch her, every gesture, every nuance, with new eyes. He would look for something, anything, that could confirm the insidious whispers that were now screaming in his mind. He would play along, maintain the charade, walk down the aisle. But his heart, instead of being detached and guarded, was now a pounding drum of terror and a terrifying, desperate hope. The silence from the 2-year gap, once merely an anomaly, now felt like a gaping maw, threatening to swallow him whole. That night, sleep refused him. He lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling, the city lights painting dancing shadows on the walls. He replayed every interaction with Olivia, every seemingly innocent comment, every shared glance. He tried to find the cracks, the inconsistencies, not in her supposed performance as a gold digger, but in her identity as Olivia Hayes. He started to notice subtle mannerisms, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the precise angle of her head when she listened intently, the slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her lips when she was amused. These were things he had seen before countless times, but never on Olivia Hayes, only on Sarah Jenkins. He felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. The similarities, once dismissed as cruel tricks of his memory, now seemed irrefutable, undeniable. He felt like he was losing his mind, grasping at straws trying to resurrect a ghost. But the image of Lily, humming that lullaby, her small hand tracing the river stone, would not leave him. It was a beacon, a terrifying, impossible beacon of what could be. He would walk down that aisle, he resolved, not out of cynical obligation, but driven by a desperate, all-consuming need to rip back the veil, not just from Olivia's face, but from the very fabric of his shattered past. The wedding, once a strategic transaction, had transformed into an impending inquisition, a public unraveling of a truth he was now certain was far more complex and far more devastating than he could have ever imagined. The final days before the wedding were a blur of opulence and mounting dread for Ethan. Every conversation, every interaction was now filtered through the terrifying lens of his burgeoning suspicion. The casual observations, once dismissed as cruel tricks of memory, now screamed with an unbearable clarity. He felt like a detective in his own life, but the case wasn't against a calculating gold digger. It was against the very fabric of his reality, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed narrative of his past. He watched Olivia with an intensity that verged on desperation, searching for the definitive proof, the single undeniable sign that would either confirm his impossible hope or plunge him back into the lonely abyss of grief and cynical certainty. One afternoon, a charity gala hosted by the Thorn Foundation required Olivia to give a short speech about the importance of community support for single mothers. She stood on the stage, poised and articulate, her voice clear and resonant, advocating for better access to resources and educational opportunities. Her passion was palpable, her arguments well-reasoned. But it wasn't her eloquence that transfixed Ethan. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture. As she reached the climax of her speech, emphasizing the need for empathy, She subconsciously tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her left ear, a gesture so precise, so familiar, it felt like a punch to his gut. Sarah used to do that when she was passionately explaining something she deeply believed in, a nervous habit that always endeared her to him. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He gripped the edge of the linen-draped table, the sound of polite applause ringing hollow in his ears. It couldn't be. It simply couldn't. He cornered Marcus Miller in the quiet alcove of the hotel bar later that evening. "Marcus," Ethan began, his voice barely a whisper, "that period upstate, the cabin, the community center, did anyone there mention a scar?" Marcus frowned, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "A scar, Mr. Thorne? No, I don't recall anyone mentioning a scar." "Why?" Ethan ignored the question. "What about her handwriting? Did you manage to get a sample of Olivia Hayes's handwriting? Something official, like a signature?" Marcus looked genuinely perplexed. "I have copies of her lease agreement, Lily's school registration forms. Her signature is consistent across all documents. Looks like standard script, nothing particularly distinctive." "Why the sudden interest in handwriting?" "I need you to compare it," Ethan pressed, his eyes burning with an almost manic intensity, "with Sarah Jenkins' handwriting. Find something. Anything. A flourish, a tilt, a specific way she forms a letter. I need to know." Marcus's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his usually stoic face. "Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, Sarah Jenkins has been gone for 5 years. Her records are sealed. Her death certificate is definitive. This is highly irregular." "Irregular is what you've been feeding me, Marcus," Ethan retorted, his voice low and dangerous. "No record, no digital footprint, a blank 2-year gap, a struggling graphic designer with expertise in rare French wines, antique jewelry, and obscure camellia varieties. And a 5-year-old humming a childhood lullaby only 3 people in the world knew. Something is wrong, Marcus. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. Find me that comparison." Marcus, sensing the steel beneath Ethan's desperation, nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do, Mr. Thorne. It won't be easy, but I'll try." He left, leaving Ethan to stare into his half-empty glass, the ice cubes rattling like bones. The next day, during a final dress fitting for Olivia's wedding gown, Ethan found himself observing from a discreet distance. The dress, a custom design of ivory silk and delicate lace, was exquisite. Olivia stood before the full-length mirror, turning slowly, the fabric rustling softly. The designer, an effusive Italian woman, was making final adjustments. "And this," the designer cooed, pointing to a subtle, almost invisible mend on the left forearm of the dress. "We made sure to integrate it perfectly, darling. You mentioned a small imperfection, and we made it disappear." Olivia smiled, a slight, almost shy smile. "Thank you. It's perfect." Ethan felt a jolt. A small imperfection. A faded scar. The synopsis mentioned a faded scar on her left forearm that the dress subtly concealed. He knew Sarah had a small scar on her left forearm from a childhood accident, a souvenir from falling off her bike at age 7. He remembered teasing her about it, calling it her battle wound. He stared at Olivia's left forearm, concealed beneath the elegant lace of the sleeve, the slight curve of the fabric where the mend had been made. His heart hammered against his ribs. The details were piling up, each one a hammer blow to his carefully constructed denial. Later that day, his grandmother, Evelyn, visited him. She didn't mince words. "Ethan, you're looking like a man haunted. Your eyes are hollow. What is troubling you, really?" He hesitated, then the dam broke. He told her carefully, haltingly about the French wine, the locket, the camellias, the lullaby, the upstate gap, the way Olivia tucked her hair. He left out his escalating, terrifying conclusion, unwilling to voice such an outlandish thought. Evelyn listened, her keen eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she remained silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out and took his hand, her touch surprisingly firm. "My dear boy," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Sometimes the truth is not what we expect, but what we refuse to see. Sarah, she had a resilience, a spirit. She was not easily broken. And she was a master of discretion when she needed to be." She paused, her gaze distant, as if reliving old memories. "There was a family secret years ago. Not one of our family, but a close acquaintance, a woman thought to be dead, who reappeared years later to save her son from an injustice. Sometimes, Ethan, the most extraordinary truths are hidden in plain sight, protected by the most cunning of deceptions, for the right reasons. Evelyn looked at him, a profound understanding in her gaze. "Open your eyes, Ethan. Truly open them." Her words, rather than assuaging his fears, ignited them into a roaring inferno of possibility. His grandmother, the rock of his family, the embodiment of pragmatic wisdom, was not dismissing him. She was, in her subtle way, validating his growing, terrifying intuition. He had to know. He had to. The wedding morning arrived, cloaked in an unseasonable mist that shrouded the New York skyline, mirroring the fog in Ethan's mind. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis, usually a beacon of light and splendor, felt strangely hushed, almost ominous. The air was heavy with the perfume of 1,000 white roses, their beauty a cruel mockery of the turmoil raging within him. He dressed mechanically, his movements precise but automatic. His custom-tailored tuxedo, usually a symbol of his power and control, felt like a ceremonial shroud. His best man, a longtime friend and business associate, chattered nervously about stock prices and market trends, but Ethan heard none of it. His world had narrowed to a single, agonizing question. His mind replayed Evelyn's words. "Sometimes the truth is not what we expect, but what we refuse to see." And Marcus's inability to find anything concrete, that tantalizing 2-year void. He thought of Lily, her bright eyes, her infectious giggle, her humming that lullaby. Could it be? Could his daughter, the child of the woman he believed to be dead, be walking down the aisle right now, just beyond the ornate doors of the ballroom? The thought was so monumental, so earth-shattering, it threatened to buckle his knees. He stood at the altar, the weight of expectation pressing down on him from the 200 pairs of eyes fixed expectantly on the aisle. The crystal chandeliers above cast a warm, golden glow, but he felt only a chill. The string quartet began to play. A hush fell over the room. The large lacquered doors at the end of the aisle swung open, revealing Olivia. She stood there, a vision in white, bathed in the soft, ethereal light. Her custom gown, of ivory silk and delicate Chantilly lace, clung to her form with an elegant grace. Her dark hair was styled in an intricate updo, accentuating the delicate curve of her neck. But it was the veil that captivated him, a delicate cascade of antique lace that obscured her features, turning her face into an enigma. The veil, a symbol of mystery and purity, now felt like an impenetrable barrier, holding hostage the answer to the most profound question of his life. She began her slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, her movements fluid and graceful, a picture of serene composure. With each step, the distance between them closed, and with it, Ethan's internal turmoil intensified. He tried to reconcile the image before him, the beautiful, poised bride, with the cynical opportunist he believed her to be, and with the impossible ghost of the woman he loved. The two images clashed, creating a dissonance that throbbed in his temples. He observed every detail. The subtle shimmer of the embroidery on her dress, the way the light caught the delicate lace of the veil, the steady, rhythmic beat of her footsteps echoing softly in the vast room. He looked past the gown, past the lace, trying to glimpse the woman beneath to find a tell, a flaw in the performance, or a heartbreaking confirmation of his deepest fears and most fervent, secret wishes. His heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He felt a sudden crushing wave of nausea, the room starting to spin imperceptibly around him. He gripped the edge of the altar, his knuckles white, forcing himself to breathe, to stay upright. This was it, the moment of truth, a precipice from which there would be no turning back. His life as he knew it was about to shatter, one way or another. Olivia, now unequivocally the woman he was about to marry, or the ghost of the woman he still mourned, was almost upon him. Her eyes, magnified and shadowed behind the sheer fabric, seemed to hold a world of secrets, a quiet depth that both beckoned and terrified him. He felt an inexplicable pull, a primal recognition that transcended logic, urging him forward, demanding to know. As she finally reached the altar standing before him, her presence both achingly familiar and jarringly foreign, his hand, trembling almost imperceptibly, began its slow, inevitable ascent. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the soft, cool lace, poised to lift the veil to reveal the face that would either confirm his worst suspicions or resurrect his entire world. The breath caught in his throat. He had to know. The question, unspoken and monumental, hung heavy in the air between them. Ethan Thorne's hand, suspended in the air, seemed to move in slow motion as he reached for the delicate Chantilly lace veil. The opulent ballroom of the Saint. Regis Hotel, filled with 200 of New York's elite, blurred into an indistinct background. The scent of 1,000 white roses, usually intoxicating, now felt cloying, suffocating. His heart, a frantic drum in his chest, pounded a rhythm against his ribs that threatened to shatter his composure. He had spent weeks, months, years, meticulously constructing walls around his grief, around his cynicism, around the unwavering belief that Sarah Jenkins was dead. Now with a single gesture, those walls were about to be utterly demolished. His fingers, slightly trembling, finally brushed against the cool, gossamer fabric. The lace, intricate and beautiful, felt like a barrier between two worlds. He took a shallow breath, the air thick with unspoken expectation. He lifted the veil. His eyes met hers. The world lurched violently on its axis. The chandeliers, previously casting a warm golden glow, seemed to dim, then flared, then dimmed again. The faces of the guests, moments ago a sea of expectant smiles, receded into an indistinct haze, their murmurs fading into a distant, muffled hum. A sudden, crushing wave of nausea hit him, powerful and disorienting. He stumbled, barely catching himself on the edge of the altar, before his knees threatened to buckle beneath him. It was not Olivia Hayes staring back at him. It was Sarah Jenkins. His Sarah. The woman he had loved profoundly. The woman whose memory had haunted his every waking moment for 5 agonizing years. The woman who had supposedly died tragically in a car accident in upstate New York. Her dark hair was styled differently, pulled back elegantly from her face rather than the free-flowing waves he remembered. A small, almost unnoticeable mole that had once graced her left cheek was gone. But those were undeniably her vivid green eyes, sparkling with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. That was the slight, familiar upturn of her lips when she was trying to be brave. That was the gentle curve of her jawline, the faint, almost imperceptible tilt of her head when she was listening intently. It was her. Impossible, undeniable, heartbreakingly, miraculously her. His heart didn't just stop. It spontaneously shattered and impossibly reassembled in the same instant. A violent, agonizing reconstruction. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs, scrambling his thoughts, obliterating every last shred of his carefully maintained composure. He felt a choked gasp escape his throat, a primal sound of utter disbelief and profound, overwhelming recognition. The reality of her presence was so immediate, so visceral, it bypassed all logic, all reason, all the carefully constructed barriers of his grief. She was alive. She was here. She was Olivia Hayes. A faint murmur rippled through the guests, utterly unaware of the profound, world-altering earthquake that had just struck their stoic CEO. Evelyn Thorne, his grandmother, watching from the front row, placed a hand over her mouth, her shrewd eyes wide with a dawning comprehension that mirrored the impossible truth unfolding before Ethan. Marcus Miller, positioned discreetly near the back, his gaze fixed on the altar, stiffened, his usually impassive face etched with a fleeting expression of profound gravity. Sarah, now unequivocally Olivia, placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her touch, achingly familiar, sent a jolt through him, both comforting and jarringly foreign. It was the touch of the woman he loved, the ghost made flesh, yet still shrouded in a layer of profound mystery. In a low, urgent whisper that only he, and perhaps the closest microphones for the broadcast, could possibly hear, she began to unravel the unthinkable truth, her words a torrent against the sudden, deafening silence in Ethan's mind. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion, "it was never an accident. The car crash, it was staged, a meticulously orchestrated event." Her vivid green eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, met his, pleading for understanding, for belief. A rival corporate family. They wanted to dismantle Thorne Industries, to crush your empire, your family's legacy, and they used me as an unwitting pawn. Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling, struggling to process the monumental implications of her words. Staged, a corporate rival. Sarah, his beloved Sarah, not dead, but forced to disappear. It was a plot from a spy novel, not the sober reality of his meticulously ordered life. They forced me to disappear, she continued, her voice gaining a desperate urgency, to vanish from my old life, assume a new identity, to stay hidden. Her gaze shifted ever so briefly to the first row where Lily sat, a small, radiant figure in a flower girl's dress, smiling innocently. And to raise our daughter Ethan. Lily, she's your daughter, conceived weeks before the supposed crash. The revelation hit him with the force of a tidal wave. Lily, his daughter, the little girl he had been observing from a distance, the child he had grudgingly accepted as an inconvenient part of his arranged marriage, was his flesh and blood. The lullaby, the river stone, the uncanny familiarity, it all clicked into place, a devastating, beautiful, impossible truth. His throat tightened, tears pricking at his eyes, a mixture of profound grief for lost time and an overwhelming, incandescent joy. 5 years. 5 years of her existence he had missed. 5 years of believing he was alone. The single mum persona, Sarah whispered, pulling him back to the present. It was a desperate, carefully constructed shield. A means to stay hidden from the true culprits, who I knew would still be watching, still looking for ways to hurt you, to destroy everything you built. She paused, taking a shaky breath. The debt repaid, on the phone call you overheard, it was to the underground network, the people who helped me disappear, who kept me safe, hidden for 5 agonizing years. It was a final, exorbitant payment that had utterly depleted my meager resources. She extended her left arm, pulling back the sleeve of her gown ever so slightly. There, just above her wrist, was a faded, crescent-shaped scar. It was the imperfection the dress designer had subtly mended. It was Sarah's battle wound from childhood, now deeper, more pronounced, a grim testament to the violence of the accident. "This scar," she murmured, her voice laced with pain. "It's a memento from the accident. It was meant to kill me, Ethan. They wanted me gone, permanently." The horror of it twisted in Ethan's gut. Someone had tried to murder Sarah. Someone had forced her to abandon her life, to raise their daughter in secret, all to protect him and his company. The arranged marriage, which he had resented as a cynical ploy, had, in her desperation, become a last-ditch gamble. "My marriage to you," she explained, her voice barely audible, "it was my only way back. To get close enough to warn you of the continued threat, to expose the real manipulators who still lurked in the shadows, and above all, to protect Lily, to finally bring her to you." Ethan, reeling from the onslaught of impossible truths, could only stare. His mind, usually a fortress of logic, was in chaos. He demanded, his voice hoarse with emotion, "Proof, Sarah. I need proof. Irrefutable proof." His gaze swept across the bewildered faces of the guests, the curious stares, the confusion starting to ripple through the crowd. This wasn't a wedding. It was a revelation, an unmasking. Sarah, with a sudden, decisive movement, reached into the elaborate lining of her wedding dress. She unstitched a barely visible seam, revealing a hidden compartment. From within, she swiftly retrieved a small, metallic flash drive. "Marcus," she said, her voice clear and strong now, her eyes locking with his, "was my primary contact. He's been ensuring my safety, feeding me critical information all these years, unbeknownst to you." Marcus Miller, the usually unflappable private investigator, now stepped forward, a grim expression on his face, a silent confirmation of her words. He had been playing a double game, protecting Sarah and Lily, while outwardly serving Ethan, waiting for this precise moment. Sarah handed the flash drive to Ethan. "This," she stated, her voice trembling but resolute, "is everything. Chilling voice recordings of your rivals planning the staged accident. Meticulously detailed financial transactions linking them directly to the crash 5 years prior, and my own comprehensive documentation of my life in hiding, including Lily's birth certificate, painstakingly forged to match my new identity, yes, but still bearing your name as the father. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis, designed for celebratory vows, abruptly transformed into an emergency security briefing. The wedding ceremony, once a symbol of superficial union, became the scene of a profound, devastating, and ultimately redemptive exposure. Ethan, with a surge of adrenaline, took the flash drive, his fingers tightening around the small device that held the key to his past, his present, and his future. He felt an overwhelming mix of anger at the betrayal, terror for Sarah and Lily's past ordeal, and an immense, unbearable relief. Sarah was alive. Lily was his. The confused guests were politely but firmly ushered out by the hotel staff, assisted by Marcus and a few discreet security personnel Ethan had hired for the wedding, who now understood the gravity of the situation. Their bewildered murmurs faded into the background, their polite curiosity replaced by a vague sense of unease. The white roses still perfumed the air, the chandeliers still gleamed, but the atmosphere had shifted from festive anticipation to urgent, calculated action. Within hours, the evidence from the flash drive was processed. The conspirators, a rival tech conglomerate led by the ruthless Sterling family, were exposed. Their meticulously planned scheme, designed to cripple Thorn Industries and eliminate Sarah, unraveled with astonishing speed. Arrest warrants were issued, their own empire collapsing around them in a spectacular, unprecedented corporate downfall. The news would break the next morning, sending shockwaves through Wall Street and the entire tech world. Ethan and Sarah, miraculously reunited amidst the wreckage of their past, now faced a future that was both profoundly restored and incredibly challenging. Lily, his daughter now 5 years old, officially entered his life, a living testament to their enduring, impossible love, a vibrant symbol of hope against the backdrop of unimaginable betrayal. The arranged marriage, intended to be a cold, calculated transaction, became the very act that brought his lost family back together, healing a wound he had believed would never, could never, close. Their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. A testament to love's impossible persistence, the shocking truth hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life, and the promise of a future forged in shared truth and unwavering commitment. The veil, once a symbol of Olivia Hayes' deception, was now a symbol of Sarah Jenkins's ultimate sacrifice, a desperate act of love that had brought her back to him and brought him the daughter he never knew he had. The ballroom, silent now save for the faint whispers of staff, held the echoes of a love that had defied death, an injustice that had been brought to light, and a family that had been impossibly, miraculously, made whole again. The opulent ballroom, moments ago filled with the hushed murmurs of New York's elite, now stood eerily silent, the scent of white roses a poignant reminder of the ceremony that had been so dramatically interrupted. Ethan Thorn, still reeling from the earth-shattering revelations, clutched Sarah's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, as if to anchor himself to the impossible reality of her presence. Lily, wide-eyed and slightly confused by the sudden exodus of guests, tugged at Sarah's gown, her innocent gaze bouncing between her mother and the formidable man who now stood beside them. "Daddy?" Lily's small voice, filled with a child's simple inquiry, sliced through the heavy silence. Ethan's breath hitched. Daddy. The word, a foreign yet deeply resonant sound, echoed in his chest. He looked at Lily, truly looked at her for the first time as his daughter. He saw Sarah's eyes, his own strong jawline, a delicate mix of them both. A profound, overwhelming love, fierce and protective, surged through him, wiping away 5 years of cynicism and grief. He knelt, tears blurring his vision, and pulled Lily into a tight embrace. "Yes, sweet pea," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here, I'm here now." Lily's small arms wrapped around his neck, a gesture of pure, unadulterated affection that healed a wound in his soul he hadn't even realized was still bleeding. Sarah watched them, a soft, heartbreaking smile playing on her lips, tears streaming freely down her face. Marcus Miller, standing a respectful distance away, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible reunion. The flash drive, its contents now being meticulously analyzed by Thorn Industries' legal team and federal agents, represented not just the downfall of a rival family, but the painstaking reconstruction of his own. Ethan eventually stood, still holding Lily's hand, and turned to Sarah. "We need to talk," he said, his voice laced with a million unspoken questions and an even greater number of emotions. Everything, from the beginning. They retreated to a private suite within the St. Regis, a sanctuary of plush carpets and hushed elegance, far removed from the public spectacle of the ballroom. Marcus joined them, his presence a quiet, reassuring anchor in the storm of their emotions. Lily, exhausted by the day's unexpected events, was gently put to sleep in a separate room by one of Sarah's trusted friends who had attended the wedding, a woman Sarah had confided in about the true nature of her plan. Sarah began to speak, her voice calm now, but still carrying the weight of years of unspoken trauma. She recounted the car accident, not as the official report had described it, but as a violent, targeted attack. She described the shadowy figures who had dragged her from the wreckage, the terrifying ultimatum, disappear, or Ethan and his family would suffer unimaginable consequences. They knew about her pregnancy, a secret she had barely begun to process herself. They had threatened Lily's life before she was even born, using her unborn child as leverage. "They wanted you to believe I was dead, Ethan," she explained, her eyes fixed on his, "so your grief would leave you vulnerable. And so I couldn't expose them. They thought I was a loose end, easily tied up." She detailed the elaborate network that had facilitated her disappearance: forged documents, safe houses, clandestine movements across state lines. The constant fear of being discovered, of bringing danger to Ethan or worse to Lily. The isolation, the desperate struggle to rebuild a life under a false identity, always looking over her shoulder. The birth of Lily in a small remote clinic upstate, a moment of profound joy tinged with the constant shadow of fear. "That 2-year gap Marcus found," she said, her voice dropping, "that was the hardest. That was when I was most alone, when Lily was a baby. Living in that cabin, trying to make enough money through my freelance work to survive, to stay off their radar. Every penny I earned went towards paying off the people who helped me vanish, the people who were my only shield against them." Ethan listened, his face a mask of dawning horror and profound guilt. He had dismissed her, scorned her, believed her to be a manipulative opportunist. All the while she had been fighting for her life, for Lily's life, making unimaginable sacrifices to protect him. He thought of his own comfort, his billions, his luxurious penthouse, contrasted with her desperate struggle in a remote cabin, fearing for her existence, raising their child in secret. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth. "And the wedding?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. How did you get the board to arrange it?" Sarah managed a wry, sad smile. "It was a gamble, a desperate, final gamble. I knew I couldn't approach you directly. Too risky. They were still watching. But I had been feeding Marcus information over the years, subtle hints about the Sterling family's illicit dealings, things that would eventually point to their vulnerability. When the corporate scandal hit and your board started looking for a stable solution, Marcus, working discreetly, planted the idea of an arranged marriage with Olivia Hayes. He framed it as a strategic move to restore public image, knowing their antiquated sensibilities would embrace it. He helped shape the narrative around me. The modest single mother from Queens, exactly what they would expect to control. "My grandmother," Ethan murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "She knew. She saw something." Sarah nodded, a fond look in her eyes. "Evelyn, she's remarkable. She always had a way of seeing past the surface. She often gave me subtle clues, reassurance that she sensed something was amiss, that she recognized me in a way. And all those coincidences," Ethan mused, "the French wine, the locket, the camellias. They weren't coincidences at all, were they?" "No," Sarah confirmed, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "I knew you would be suspicious. I knew you would investigate. I left those breadcrumbs, the wine, the locket. I knew you'd look for flaws in my persona. I used those details to subtly remind you, to plant seeds of doubt in your certainty about who Olivia Hayes was, without ever fully revealing myself. It was my way of testing the waters, of seeing if you were ready to truly see me again, if you were open to the possibility that your reality wasn't what you thought it was." Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed by the sheer complexity and courage of her plan. "And Marcus, he was feeding you my itinerary, my family's schedule, everything." "Yes," Marcus interjected, his voice gruff but firm. "I was the go-between. Sarah reached out to me shortly after the accident. She knew I was loyal to you, but also ethical. She trusted me to keep her secret and to protect you both in my own way. I ensured her survival, kept her hidden, and helped her orchestrate this return when the time was right. This wedding, it was the only way to get her close enough, safely, to reveal the truth and bring down the Sterlings. It was a risky play, but it paid off. The full weight of what Sarah had endured, what she had risked, crashed down on Ethan. He had built his world on logic and control, and she had navigated a labyrinth of deception and danger with nothing but her wits. her love for Lily, and an unwavering commitment to him. He reached out, taking her hands in his thumbs tracing the lines on her skin. "Sarah," he began, his voice raw with emotion, "I am so sorry. For everything. For not seeing it, for not believing, for letting you go through all of this alone." She squeezed his hands. "You weren't alone, Ethan. I was always with you in spirit, and I knew you would never give up. I knew you would eventually find the truth once it was laid bare before you, and you did." Their conversation stretched into the early hours of the morning, a painful but cathartic unraveling of 5 years of secrets, fear, and profound love. They discussed the aftermath, the legal proceedings against the Sterling family, the rebuilding of Thorn Industries' reputation, and most importantly, how to integrate Lily into Ethan's life to help her understand the impossible story of her parents. He learned that Sarah had meticulously documented every step of her life in hiding, anticipating this day. She had kept a journal, chronicling Lily's milestones, her first words, her first steps, addressed to Ethan, a poignant testament to the mother he thought he had lost, and the daughter he never knew he had. She handed him the worn, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her familiar handwriting, the same distinctive flourishes he had asked Marcus to compare. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first entry. October 14th, 5 years ago. "My dearest Ethan, if you ever read this, know that I am alive and our baby is safe. I miss you every single day." A fresh wave of emotion washed over him. The connection was undeniable, the truth a force of nature. He closed the journal, holding it to his chest, a precious relic of a past he could now finally reclaim. As dawn approached, painting the New York sky in hues of soft pink and orange, a sense of profound peace, mingled with the daunting reality of their new beginning, settled over them. They had lost 5 years, endured unimaginable suffering, but they had found each other again. More than that, they had found their daughter. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant, despite the storm they had weathered. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that had defied death, a love that had been forged in the crucible of betrayal and resilience. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his thumb caressing the familiar curve. "Now," he said, a new resolve in his voice, "we build our future, together, as a family, and we make sure that no one ever threatens us again." He pulled her into a tender embrace, holding her close, a silent promise echoing in the quiet suite. The arranged marriage, born of corporate scandal and cynical manipulation, had become the unlikely catalyst for the most profound reunion of his life. The pain of the past was still there, a vivid scar, but it was now overlaid with the radiant promise of a future, finally impossibly found. The grand ballroom, a monument to their dramatic unveiling, was now simply the place where their new life had truly begun.